Okay, hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about pencils and shading. As you see in front of you, I have a variety of pencils. You will make note that the shortest one is the HB. That's the one I use daily. Pencils come in a variety of hardnesses. I'm not showing you every pencil I own. I just took a variety from each end. HB is sort of the number 2 pencil, the standard pencil that comes in every you know school kids pencil. It's the middle between H for hard and B for soft. So I don't know why it doesn't say S for soft, but it doesn't. It says B, but H is the hard ones and B is the softer lead. And so I've put a few up here, the HB, and then there's the B and the H, just a standard B and H. Like that would be like a 1H or a 1B. They don't put the number 1. I don't know. Consistency, right? And then I went up to 2H and 2B. I'm missing one. I thought I had another H. Oh, I thought I had another H. Hang on one moment. I thought I had a 3. I do have a 3H. Somehow I put it away. Not good. Sharpen it so they all have a nice point. Okay, so I went HB, B and H, 2H, 2B. I don't have a 4H, but I have a 3H and a 4B. Those are close. And then I don't have a 6H. I have a 6B and a 5H. Those are close though. That you'll show the range. It'll go from HB to H, 2H, 3H, 5H, and then B, 2B, 4B, 6B. That's close enough for demonstration purposes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to scooch these so you can see maybe just the tips of them. You'll still know which order they're in. I will write the order. And I'm going to, right over here, I'm going to swatch these and use my blending stump so you can see how much they spread. Okay, so I'm going to start in the middle with my HB. And let me see if I can write the word HB so that you guys can read it. That will be upside down for me. All right. So let's just do, and that's just a standard, I'm not going hard, just a standard HB, okay? Done. Then I'm going to do an H, and that's a little harder. You might notice that the points, it can make a nice fine point, but it's a little harder, and it doesn't draw. I'm going to go on the edge. It makes a really thin point. This one makes a little bit thicker point. Okay. Then we're going to go to 2H. How do I write the number 2 so you guys can read it? This way. Because I'm sideways, so bear that in mind. But it makes a nice fine one, and if I go on the side to try to make it, you can get pretty light with this one. The higher the number for the H, the lighter your pencil is going to be. So then this one is a 3H, and I don't know if you can notice that the pencil has gotten much thinner. It's become a pointier point, and it creates a thinner line and a little bit lighter. I'm putting the same pressure as I did with these, and that's much lighter. Doesn't give out as much graphite. The graphite is much harder. Okay, and then I'm going to go with a 5H, number 5 going sideways. That's a challenge. So that makes a really thin line. It's like going to, taking your micron pen and going to the smaller side like the 005. So it makes a really thin line, and it's harder to do like a wash of color, and it's a lot lighter. I'm pressing the same. Okay, and then we're going to go the other way. Regular B. There's the line it makes, and here's the softness of it. It makes a darker, when I'm not pushing any harder, it makes a darker mark. Number 2B. It doesn't get as thin. It's still thin, but it doesn't get as thin. But doing just the same pressure, it does make a considerably darker mark. 4B. Oh, that's really soft. Okay, there's the line, and that's like butter. So if you're drawing, you want the different kinds of pencil leads in order to have different gradations of value in your drawings. And then this one, what was it? 6? Ugh, 6. 6 needs to go this way. 6B. Okay. That's super soft. It can't go to a super fine point. That's as fine a point as I can get, and it's a lot more blunt than the H. Where's the... I've already set them down over here. But I don't know if you can tell the difference in the pointiness, but this one can't get as pointy because it's so soft. But that's the same amount of pressure. And look how much graphite I put down. That's a lot. And they can get even softer, but that's the range that I have. And then what I was going to do is I'm going to grab my blending stump, and I'm going to start with the lightest one and work my way to the darkest one and show you how much graphite I can smudge when I'm doing smudging. Actually, I probably should start with a clean blending stump. That was dumb to not start with a clean one. Oh, I have fresh ones. I have brand new ones in here. Yes, I do. Brand new blending stump. Okay, let's try again. Let's erase that, because that might have had graphite on it from previous. And let's do a little bit more of the 5H, just to make sure it's got a fair test. There we go. Okay, so this is the 5H. That's how much it blends. See, I did have graphite on the blending stump from previous. Okay, not much. The 3H, you can squidge it out quite a bit more. The 2H, it's starting to look more like what I normally do when I'm doing my drawings, right? The H will probably be the closest. Here's the HB. This is what I normally, the kind of blending I get. See how far out I can go before it really disappears. Then we can go to B. And it's similar. B and HB and H are going to be very similar because they're close together, right? But as soon as you get down here into the softer leads, look how far it can carry the color. 6B is super soft. Look at that smudgy goodness. But it can carry color like way out there. Okay, so that's going to be the difference between which type of pencil you use. Most people have access to an HB pencil because it's the same pencil as a standard school pencil. You know, the old yellow pencil. Same kind of lead. It's except for, of course, I grabbed one that is not a standard pencil. This particular one, yeah, you have to watch it. This one is actually called an extra hard pencil, so it's actually labeled a 2H. So it's up here. This is not a normal, regular school pencil. These pencils came in sets. They're just drawing sets. They're really cheap. At any of your art supply stores will have drawing pencils in a set. Pencils are kind of pencils, but you do have to know the hardness scale, because that will make a difference on your drawings. Okay, so that aside, and I'm going to actually work with the B one because it's a little longer. This little stubby thing is getting kind of hard to work with. So I have done a couple of things. First off, I've made some shapes. Depending on when you're doing shading in general for shapes, not for tangle patterns, but for just shapes in general, you want to know where your light source is coming from. I myself personally usually end up choosing to have my light coming from the upper left of my paper. And if I'm going to do that on this circle, if I'm assuming that this circle is an actual object and it's three-dimensional like a ball, the light will be hitting kind of here, right? So that'll be super shiny. That won't have any graphite. But as the light comes around the object, like my glob of eraser here, you can see that the light is up here and it's darker down here because there doesn't get light to it, right? And it casts a shadow onto the paper. So if my light's coming from here, then my darkest part is going to be over here, right? So if you shade on this side with the dark, like that, and you make that the thickest, and then you take your blending stump and you go upward with that, and you let it fade out as you go upward. Make sure that normally wouldn't be there like that because I drew that, but leave that part there with nothing. You just blend that out. It now looks more like a ball, and it'll look even more like a ball if it's sitting on a surface and you give it a shadow. And if the light is coming here, it will create a shadow this way, kind of in its own shape, right? And it'll create a shadow. It'll be really dark down here, like this, and it will create a shadow going out that direction. It's the same circle. That is that. Okay? If the light is coming from straight, like from the camera, let's say the camera was shooting a beam of light, you might actually have the light spot here, and you might actually, it would be kind of weird, but every so often you get an object that's lit that way, and you would have the shading kind of all the way around, and it would get lighter toward the middle, like that. And when that happens, if I get rid of that mark, When that happens, your eye will do one of two things. Your eye will either see that as a solid with the light source toward the viewer, or your eye will see that as a hole. Can you see both of those things? To make it a solid, you still need to make a bit of a shadow, but it won't be as big of long shadow because it's not going to be casting a big shadow. It's not like blocking as much light. It'll just be a little shadow. And now it's a solid ball and not a hole in the paper. The shadow actually would be kind of going back that way. Like that. Okay? And then, if your light source was coming from behind the ball, you would actually have the darkest part here. Really dark. And your shadow would be going this way. So your ball would be darkest the furthest away from the light source. So you might actually see a little bit of light kind of around the edge there if the light was coming from behind the ball, but it would create a shadow going this way. You see how those are all the same ball shaded differently, and your eye sees it as different with the light source going in a different direction. So this is a light source behind, this is a light source in front, and this is a light source off to the side. Same thing if you have like a cube. If your light is coming from here, your dark side of this cube is going to be this one. And then you'll have some light there. You'll have a little bit of dark here. And you'll have, this one will be the lightest surface because it's kind of coming down onto this surface. And this one will be slightly grayer. So you'll have this happening. Blend it out. You'll have a little bit maybe of a little bit of shading that way. And you'll have a little bit of shading going this way. So that will be your mid value. That will be your darker value. That will have a little bit of bleed depending on how bright this light is. And you'll have a shadow coming out here. And your shadow will be touching your object. Why does your shadow need to be touching your object? Because if your shadow isn't touching your object will be floating. So let's try that again with this box, but with a floating shadow. And show you how that's important. Lightly shading here. I'm not doing it super careful. I'm just giving you kind of a sample. My table is making a noise. Okay. Lighter shading here. Okay, there's my shaded box again, right? So now instead of just being lines, it's a cube. But if I put my shadow like that, that box is now hovering over the page. It's dropping. You know, if you put some movement lines here, it would be falling, or you know, or it's hovering in some manner. So there's a shadow, and that's called a drop shadow when the item isn't touching your shape. So in in my Tangle patterns, I'm going to move my camera just slightly because I've got my yellow page underneath and I don't want you guys to see the yellow. It's distracting me. The yellow is distracting me. Let me loosen that and scooch that over just a smidge. Okay. Okay, and if you guys hear noises outside, the painters are here, so, you know, it is what it is. Okay, let's say we have this shape. This is maybe a leaf or something. If you shade here, touching this whole surface right up against the edge, let's make sure we're all touching there. And then you blend that out. I need to turn my paper. And maybe a little up here on the shape to show that it's got some dimension. Okay, so we've got a shape that's sitting on the paper. Okay. Let's say we have this same shape. We're going to put that little bit of shading here so that it has some dimension. But because I want this shape to be not quite sitting on the paper, instead of making the shadow right up against that line, I'm going to start the shadow here because I want it to be resting on the paper here. But then I want to do like this. I'm going to follow the shape of this shape. I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to blend this. And then you guys can see what happens. This is a drop shadow. And as soon as I do that, if this is like a green bean, for example, it's now sitting up off the page instead of laying flat on the page. See how my blending stump creates a shadow all across my paper when it's laying down? And if I lift this end, my shadow is no longer touching my object. It's now down here. Same thing here. Okay, that's how you make a drop shadow on a tangle. So now let's move on to pattern. Okay, let's move on to how you might shade some patterns. Let's do some simple shading here. Zoom in. Okay, if you shade this on the inside like this, what happens? Oh, that's a terrible blending stump. I gotta throw that one away. That one's broken. Okay. If you shade on the inside of that, it looks like that. It kind of looks like there's a hole there, right? Shade on the outside of the shape. Got a little bit of extra pencil where I didn't want it, but you shade on the outside of the shape. It's the same shape, but now that looks like this shape is up off the page. It's like sitting on the page, plopped down like you had a square of something plopped onto the page. If you shade with a light source, and you want this to look like it's got a hole in it, you shade that side and this side, and you've now got a deeper hole than like that, right? That kind of looks like a hole, but now this really looks like a hole because you've created a light source. This doesn't have a light source. It's kind of like a shade inside, but it doesn't have a light source. That one's got a light source, and that makes it more dimensional. You can do the same thing with just a pen and just thicken the lines. Oops, this is not a good pen to do this with, but that's okay. It works. thicken the lines on this side and this side, and you'll create the same sort of illusion. And let's say we've done this already, but we want this to look more dimensional. So what we can do is, let's assume a light source, because we already assumed a light source here. Let's do a little bit darker here and a little darker here with pencil. What did I do with my blending stump? Okay. Now this shape doesn't look flat. It looks like it's got a bit of a curve to it. Even though it was drawn exactly the same as that one and that one and that one. Those are all the same boxes. They're just shaded differently. Okay? And then if you have them this way, you can do any of these techniques with this, or I like to, when I'm having this kind, I like to put the shading into the corners, like so, where the angle is. And you get another look all together. Now it looks like it's going down in, especially if you then do this. To the shape. Now I've created a box with a hole that goes deep down inside. Okay? You can apply that to your patterns. We're going to have 2 grids. You can absolutely shade, assuming no particular light source. So we're going to just take these lines and we're just going to shade. I gotta turn my paper. If you hear the painters, don't mind them. They're doing their thing out there. But I'm going to shade this with no particular light source. With it just kind of general, like that. No particular light source. Or I can take this one and I can do the same thing, but I can be more careful with my pencil, and I can say, let's have a light source this way. So this side of this pencil line, or that pen line, will have a shadow. Just the one side, not both sides like I did here. I think a little bit more carefully about how I'm going to do this. Okay, and then where else will I have shadow? I'll have that on the underside of here. So my shading will go here. So when you're shading a grid pattern, think about if you want a general shading or if you want to choose that the object has a light source. And the reason I didn't put an actual pattern in here is because this idea of shading applies to any grid pattern. So see how they're different? Those are the 2 different ways. Let's see if I can put them right in the middle of the viewfinder. It's kind of, I didn't put them close enough together. Like that. This is fine. To me, this is better. I like having a light source. You don't have to have a light source though, you really don't. Let's say you have two things and you've created a composition, and your composition is got this sort of snake ribbon-y thing, and you've put some sort of pattern in there. I'm assuming you've got a pattern here, you've got patterns there, right? I'm assuming that. Depending on how you shade it will determine how it looks. Let's say you choose to shade this side and just this side of this. What does that do? It kind of makes this like not quite right, but you're not too sure why. To me anyway. But if I do this with a little bit less, because I'm still assuming I love my light source coming from this side. I've got a little bit of shadow here, and I've got a lot on this side because this object is casting a shadow and it's creating itself to be a more solid. I wanted to put a little bit more on there because I wanted it darker. Okay, now I've created some sort of 3D object that is on top of whatever's back here. Does that make sense? That's become a 3D thing. Or you can make it look, if you, depending on how you do it, if you fill this more in with shadow, if you don't have that highlight, you have it much more grayed out, then these two pieces can look like they're on top and you're looking down into some sort of cavern or crevasse or something. But if you leave this more light, and this is the joy of pencil because you can erase it, if you leave this more light in the middle, it looks like a leaf or some sort of snail or some sort of shape that's on top of this. Okay, let's do it again here, but we're going to do it the other way. We're going to do the shading over here. And this really makes this look like it's on top. If we do the shading on this side. I've done it both ways in my drawings. And there's no right or wrong way. I want to just show you how, if you want this to feel like it's on top, this is how you're going to do it. You're going to push the background back by giving it shadow. And this is more of a flat, what I've just done, because I've got my shadow the same on both sides of my object. And if I wanted to create a light source, I would then make this side darker and bigger. Like this. Now I've got a light source. I didn't have one before. I'm hoping I'm making sense. One more last thing on creating shading on your patterns. And the reason I'm not doing it on particular patterns is because I don't want you to focus on how to shade this pattern, how to shade that pattern, because my choices might be different depending on how I make my drawing and the way I want to highlight certain features. But your light areas will always feel like they're coming forward, closer to you, closer to the viewer, and the dark areas will feel like they're receding back away from you. And so I wanted to highlight that here by doing two different things. This one, I'm going to go around the outside of this shape. Okay, got a shape, and I have created, and the reason you want to blur this is because it just looks better, first off, than your sloppiness. But secondly, your eye, you're used to seeing shadows. Every day you see shadows, and you know what they look like. And so if you create a shadow, your brain immediately says, oh yeah, that's a shadow. Okay, that's a shadow. And if you had pattern on here and you had pattern on here, you would differentiate the two. And you would immediately say, this one, because it's lighter, is on top of this one. If you wanted it to seem like it was floating more, you might do not quite as much there, and you actually might you still want to do that shape, and it might go like that. The shadow might go like that with a floating shadow, and it might be floating now above the page, if that's the look you're going for. I don't particularly like that on this particular shape, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this little bit back here. I want it touching, but I'm going to leave that really thick on this side compared to this side, and I'm going to give it a light source. It's still all flat and touching the page, but because it's created a deeper shadow on one side than the other, I've actually now got a light source. It seems to be coming from about there, because it's created a bigger shadow over here. Okay, now let's do this shape the other way. Let's do this shape on the inside. As soon as you do it on the inside, you've created a hole. Now, whether or not you have pattern in here, it really doesn't make any difference. You can, or you can just have it as a white or an unpatterned spot. Okay, so now I kind of have a hole in my paper, and you want to really make it look like you have a hole in your paper. Make a light source. The thing with the holes and light source, if the light source is coming from here, the edge of this will actually create the deeper shadow. Like that. And this will actually catch some light, and it won't be quite as shady. It'll still have a little bit because it's a hole, but it won't be as much as I did the first time. But that will cast more of a shadow because this object is 3D. So now it's got a deeper hole. Does that make sense? I hope some of this makes sense. Somebody really asked for a shading video. So there's that. The different ways you can shade with and without a light source. Highlighting. Just remember, whatever you're shading, wherever there's lines converging. I didn't do that. I need to do that. Let me do that really quick here. Let's say you have a shape, just lines. Let's do just lines really quick. Shape like that. Okay, that's flat. As soon as you put shading here, where the lines converge, you then create that sort of depth, like a petal or something. Got a little carried away. Okay, and then if this side has some kind of scallop or feathering or something, and you then decide that this edge, just the one side, has a bit of shading, you create more of a three-dimensional kind of shape out of it. Like so. Okay, like that. Now you've created a sort of a three-dimensional thing with feathering. But you've got to have your spots that are left white for it to give that dimension. Does that make sense? I hope that's made sense. So anyways, there's another rambly video from me. The next one I want to do, I want to play with paradox. And I may even do one with a little bit of coloring. I don't know if I'm going to do coloring shading or not. But that's for another day, because this has gone on long enough. I hope you've gotten some information out of this. Maybe I've helped some of you guys when you were not sure exactly what you wanted to do, how to shade something. I'm hoping I helped you with drop shadows. You know, if you have your pattern, let's say you do this one with pearls. Like that. And you want to do a drop pattern there. If you do it here, like so, just stick your pearls so that they're in the right place for, and just smudge that. It's super simple. There we go. Now that line is floating. Super easy. You just have to think about your light source. Where's your light? And like I said, like I usually have my light coming from my upper left, and so you know sometimes it would, if the light is, this one is sort of like right straight above, but if I do this again, see, I thought I was done. If I do this again with this little pearl line, super simple. Okay, but I have my light source going really quite at an angle. Let's have our light source coming way over here. Okay, and I want to do a drop shadow. I want to think about that. If it's touching, if it's not just floating, like completely floating, and it could be, but if it's actually touching the page here, but it's kind of like maybe coming off this way, the shadow would come this direction more. Like that. Maybe it's standing up from the page like I did this one. Maybe it would be even longer. The shadow might be even longer because my light source is creating a longer shadow. So the shadow is going to go this way. So it's going to, oh, actually probably would hit there and there. Okay, my dots aren't in the right place. Think about it. My light's coming here. It's going to make a long shadow, and it's going to come out over there. This is going to create a long shadow out here. This is going to create a long shadow. It's actually going to come way out here. And this is going to create a long shadow out here. And this is going to create a long shadow way out here. Okay, and then we're going to smudge it. Okay, now my light source is further. And it's not as, it's created this more interesting shadow. But you just have to think about where your light is. You know, this was more straight on. This is creating shading, you know. Actually, I have too many dots. Actually, I have too many dots on that one. That one, this dot doesn't belong there. If I was to think about it really hard, but the light's coming this way, and it's creating the dots here, like that, straight across. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Okay, you guys have a great day. I'm going to leave it at that. I will see you on the next video where I will play with Paradox because I'm really wanting to do that. And yeah, you guys have a great day. I will see you tomorrow, or not tomorrow, on the next video. I'm so used to saying I'll see you tomorrow. I haven't gotten into the whole 3 times a week thing yet, but anyway, go out and do something nice for someone today. Make the world a better place. I'm going to go check on the painters and see what they're doing. They seem to be up on the ladder. That scares me. But they're professionals. They're not going to fall off the roof like my husband. Yeah, I've banned him from that. And you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.